Do you think every family has a villain, or is it more complicated?
They told me the lights would be blinding, that once I stepped onto the stage, I wouldn't see faces, only shadows. But that was a lie. The moment I stepped out and looked into that auditorium, I saw everything. I saw the front row, where the organizers had placed a row of folding chairs with neat name tags. One of them said reserved for family, still untouched. I saw the clusters of guests, strangers smiling politely, probably waiting for someone more famous to come on. I saw the camera rig, the flashing red light signaling the live stream had begun, the chat on the monitor nearby beginning to fill up with emojis and fire icons. But what I didn't see, not a single damn thing, was a familiar face. Not one person from my life. Not my mother. Not my father. And certainly not my sister. You know how people say that on the biggest days of your life, your heart races so loud it drowns everything else out? That didn't happen. My heart didn't race. It didn't ache. It didn't do anything except settle into the cold certainty I had carried for years, ever since I realized that sometimes blood doesn't mean family, it just means you share the same people in your emergency contact list, and that's about it. I stood there, hands wrapped around the mic like it was a lifeline and a weapon all at once. And I smiled, that kind of practiced, too-wide smile you see on local newscasters and women in church who've learned how to survive holiday dinners without throwing a glass across the table. I looked straight into the camera, cleared my throat, and opened with the line I'd rehearsed 1,000 times in my head but had never dared to say out loud. To the people who told me I was a disappointment, that I'd never amount to anything, that I was too much, too loud, too complicated, too ungrateful, this moment is for you. Don't bother reaching out now. I don't need your congratulations. I needed your belief. And I learned to live without it. I heard a gasp somewhere in the middle rows, probably someone who didn't expect the TEDx event to start like a monologue out of a family drama. The cameraman flinched. One of the producers dropped her pen. And the live stream chat exploded. I could see the screen flashing on the side of the stage, dozens of comments popping up faster than they could be read. And then one name appeared that made me freeze mid-sentence, right in the middle of a paragraph I'd spent weeks perfecting. Emily Reynolds. My sister. The name just sat there for a moment, stark and still, and then the little typing bubble blinked into existence. Those 3 damn dots, dancing like a ghost tapping on your shoulder. And I swear to you, for a second, I forgot where I was. I forgot the lights, the stage, the camera. I forgot the careful wording, the slow pacing, the mission of the talk. I just stared at those 3 dots like they held the power to break something in me that had already cracked so many times there wasn't much left to shatter. But right as the bubble appeared, right as I leaned slightly forward, instinctively, maybe hoping for a miracle, for an apology, for some version of closure wrapped up in digital text, the screen went black. Not a flicker. Not a delay. Just gone. The tech guy cursed under his breath. The lights dimmed. The host jogged on stage awkwardly, trying to salvage the moment. Someone whispered something about a glitch in the feed. But none of that mattered. Because what mattered, what I couldn't shake, was that she was watching. After 5 years of silence, after family birthdays, funerals, weddings passed without so much as a text, after I had been called selfish, dramatic, mentally unstable, ungrateful, for walking away, she was watching. And she was going to say something. Now you tell me, if someone who helped ruin your life, stood by and said nothing while your world fell apart, suddenly tried to type something into a live stream watched by over 10,000 people, wouldn't you want to know what the hell it was? You know, people say forgiveness is freeing. That carrying a grudge just hurts you, not them. But what those people don't understand is that some betrayals are not about anger. They're about clarity. The moment you see people exactly as they are, not as you hoped they'd be, not as they pretend to be on holidays, but exactly as they've shown themselves, time and time again. And the moment you accept that, there's no room left for bitterness. Only distance. Still, when I got back to my dressing room, peeled off the heels that had been digging into my skin all day, and sat alone under fluorescent lights with lukewarm bottled water and silence. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt like someone who'd shouted into a canyon and, for the first time, heard a whisper back. and I needed to know what that whisper said. So I picked up my phone, opened the stream replay, and watched the screen freeze right before the bubble appeared. The cached version hadn't loaded. Emily's comment never posted. It was gone. You ever spend your whole life needing one answer, and the second it gets close enough to touch, it vanishes? But before I could let the disappointment sink in fully, I saw a message request pop up. A name I hadn't seen in nearly 6 years. Someone I hadn't even realized was still following me. The message just said, "We both know what she was going to say, but you don't know the whole story." It wasn't from Emily. It was from him. Dean. My ex-husband. And just like that, everything I thought I had buried clawed its way back to the surface. You'd think a story like mine started with the divorce, with the betrayal, with the moment I opened the wrong message at the wrong time, and everything I'd believed about family and loyalty crumbled like a cheap plastic frame falling off the mantel. But no, the cracks in this story run deeper than that. Long before Dean. Long before Emily. Long before I ever stepped into adulthood thinking, maybe if I just work hard enough, they'll finally see me. The seeds had already been planted. And those seeds were watered with every sigh, every eye roll, every cutting remark disguised as parental wisdom. If you want to know how to ruin a daughter in 10 easy steps, just watch how my mother did it. It started with the comparisons, subtle at first, like passing comments that didn't seem worth fighting over, the kind that slip into your bones before you realize they've taken root. Why can't you be more like your sister? Emily never talks back. Emily's always so helpful. I used to think maybe I just had a chip on my shoulder, maybe I was too sensitive, too reactive, too defensive for my own good. But then I realized that when someone holds up a mirror and tells you every reflection is a flaw, eventually you start smashing the glass not to destroy it, but just to stop seeing yourself in it. Growing up, I was the loud one, the stubborn one, the girl who asked too many questions and didn't know how to shut up when adults were speaking. I wasn't wild, I got decent grades, never snuck out, never brought boys over, but I had a mouth on me, and in my mother's house, that was sin enough. She'd make a show of pretending to listen, head cocked, eyes narrowed, waiting for me to slip up just enough to call it disrespect. And she'd always end the argument the same way, with a bitter little smile and the phrase I learned to hate more than anything one day, "The real world's going to teach you a lesson." But the truth is, it wasn't the world that taught me the hardest lessons. It was her. Emily, on the other hand, was the golden child. 2 years younger, straight-A student, cheer captain, youth choir soloist, prom queen. If I was chaos, she was calm. If I was thunder, she was the sun. She knew how to navigate my parents like a seasoned diplomat, always agreeable, always sweet, always just good enough to never be questioned. I used to think she and I were on the same side. I thought we had the kind of bond sisters built over shared childhood bedrooms and late-night whispers about boys and dreams, and what we'd do when we were finally free. But that illusion shattered the day I realized she wasn't standing beside me, she was standing behind them. Always had been. I moved out at 21, not with a bang, but with the slow, quiet ache of someone who'd been waiting for an invitation to leave and finally realized it would never come. I packed up my life in 2 car trips, one with a friend, one alone, and not a single person offered to help. My father, who rarely spoke unless prompted, watched me carry a box of books out the front door and said only, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." My mother didn't look up from her crossword puzzle. Emily wasn't even home. That was the beginning of what I thought would be freedom, but turned out to be just another test I didn't know I was being graded on. You see, the problem with leaving is that if you fail out there, they think it proves they were right about you all along. And when I fell for Dean, charming, successful, sharp-dressed, with that fake Southern politeness that felt like safety, I thought maybe I was finally writing a new chapter. We moved in together after 6 months, married by year 2, and for a little while I felt like maybe, just maybe, I had outrun the shadow my mother cast over my life. But the thing about old wounds is that they don't stay healed just because you slap a ring on your finger and smile through holiday dinners. The first real sign something was wrong wasn't the late work nights or the locked phone or the sudden distance. It was the way my mother smiled too long the first time she saw Dean, the way she leaned into his arm when she laughed at his jokes, as if he was the one who got her approval, not me. And it was the way Emily started texting him, harmless at first, asking for advice, venting about grad school, sending memes she knew I'd find dumb, but it wasn't harmless, not really. Because she never sent those things to me. I didn't notice it all at once. It's funny, you always think betrayal will be loud, obvious, some fiery confrontation with screaming and accusations. But the worst kind is quiet. It sneaks in wearing the faces of people you love, smiling just enough to make you doubt your own gut. I started to catch things a look held too long, a conversation that stopped when I entered the room, Dean suddenly changing the subject when I mentioned my family. But every time I brought it up, I was told I was imagining things, that I was insecure, that I was projecting. And when someone tells you that enough, especially someone you love, you start to believe it. Until one night, when I picked up his phone to set an alarm, the simplest, most innocent action in the world, and saw a message from Emily that made my stomach drop straight into the floor. It wasn't explicit. It wasn't even flirty. It just said, "I wish things were different. I miss what we had." And that one sentence hit me harder than anything else could have, because it wasn't about sex or scandal. It was about something. A closeness they shared that I had never been part of. The confrontation that followed was ugly, messy, full of half-truths and stammered excuses. Dean denied everything. Emily said I was blowing things out of proportion. My mother, when I went to her in tears, genuinely hoping for some kind of support, some version of finally being seen, told me flatly, "You've always made things harder than they needed to be." And then she said something I'll never forget, not because it was shocking, but because it confirmed everything I'd always feared. Emily makes better choices. Maybe you should try being more like her. That was the night something inside me snapped, not like a twig, but like a steel cable pulled too tight for too long. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just walked out, got in my car, and drove until the tears stopped. And once they did, I realized I wasn't broken. I was free. Because when you finally stop begging people to love you the way you need, when you stop pretending they ever will, you can start building something stronger than what they tore down. But even then, even after I cut them off, changed my number, left Dean, left that house, left the entire damn city behind me, I thought Emily would reach out eventually. Just her. Quietly. Privately. With something honest. But she never did. Not until the day she showed up in the livestream. And by then, it was too late. Or at least, I wanted to believe it was. It's strange how you can spend your whole life pretending not to notice the rot growing under the surface, telling yourself that the strange taste in the water is just your imagination, that the tightness in your chest during family gatherings is nothing more than indigestion or stress, when in truth, you've been swallowing poison spoon-fed to you in polite conversation and backhanded praise since childhood. That Christmas, the one I now refer to only as the last one, didn't start with screaming, with accusations, or with shattered plates thrown across the room. No, it began like every other holiday before it, with carefully wrapped tension, too much sugar in the air, and my mother setting the table with the same cold efficiency she used to discipline us as children, methodical, distant, and without room for error. I had told myself, foolishly, that I was only attending for the sake of closure, that I was there to prove something, maybe to myself, maybe to the ghosts of every version of me that had ever wondered if I was the problem all along. I thought if I showed up, dressed well, smiling just enough to seem unaffected, maybe I could finally sever the last thread of guilt that tied me to people who hadn't really loved me in years, if they ever had at all. Dean and I were still technically together, although the silences between us had grown so loud by then they could have drowned out the Christmas carols playing on the stereo. I could barely look at him, let alone touch him, but my mother still insisted we ride up together, as if the appearance of unity was more important than the reality unraveling behind closed doors. We arrived 20 minutes early, of course we did, because Dean was nothing if not punctual, and my mother's judgment over lateness was the kind of thing that could stain your reputation in that house for years. Emily greeted us at the door like a hostess, her arms outstretched, eyes too bright, like someone performing joy rather than feeling it. She hugged Dean just a little too long, smiled a little too widely when she told him he looked so good, and then turned to me with that familiar tilt of her head, the one that said, "I know what you're thinking, and I'm still winning." I smiled back, tight-forced, professional, the kind of smile you give to someone you'd sue if it were socially acceptable. Dinner was a theater production. My father offered stiff conversation about the stock market, barely making eye contact. My mother asked Emily about her job, her new apartment, the latest guy she was dating, a neurosurgeon, or something equally convenient for bragging purposes. No one asked me a single question. Not one. It was as though I was a placeholder at the table, a shadow in the family portrait, the subject of a silent agreement to pretend I hadn't been publicly humiliated by the two people sitting across from me. Dean played his part well, laughing at the appropriate moments, holding Emily's gaze across the table like they were sharing a private joke and not, in fact, the wreckage of my life. I excused myself after dessert, pretending I needed to take a call, even though my phone hadn't buzzed once. I locked the bathroom door behind me, leaned against the counter, and opened the hidden folder on my phone, the one where I had started collecting screenshots. Not because I needed evidence, but because I needed something to stare at that would remind me I wasn't crazy. And there it was again, that message I had read 100 times, the one Emily sent to Dean 2 weeks earlier. "I miss what we had. I wish things were different." I stared at it the way you stare at a roadkill carcass you can't look away from, equal parts horror and fascination. I should have confronted them right then, burst into the dining room, and hurled the phone onto the table like a grenade. But I didn't. I wanted to see if they would dare lie to my face again. I wanted to give them one last chance to prove they were better than I knew they were. So I walked back out, took my seat, and when my mother poured another glass of wine with that smug little nod she reserved for when things were going exactly how she wanted them to, I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Did you know?" She blinked, tilted her head, and gave me the same expressionless face she used to give when she was about to deny something obvious. "Know what?" she asked, voice all honey and condescension. I turned to Emily. "Did you tell her? Or did she find out some other way?" Emily froze, her fork halfway to her mouth, the color draining from her face so fast it was almost impressive. Dean shifted in his seat, the first sign of discomfort he'd shown all evening. "Claire," he began, tone warning, like I was a child about to embarrass myself in public. But I wasn't a child anymore. And I wasn't about to be silenced. "I saw the messages." "I know everything," I said, voice steady, clear, louder than I intended. My father coughed, my mother narrowed her eyes, and Emily, for the first time, dropped the facade. "You're being dramatic," she said, her voice sharp, defensive, like someone who wasn't sorry, just sorry they'd been caught. My mother waved her hand dismissively and said, "This isn't the time or place for this, Claire." That's when I realized there would never be a time or place. Not for them. Not for my pain. Not for my truth. Because people like that don't want peace, they want control. And I had just taken it away from them. I stood up, pushed my chair back slowly, and looked at each of them, my father, who refused to meet my gaze, my mother, who looked more irritated than concerned, Emily, who now sat frozen, unsure of what version of herself to perform next, and Dean, who had nothing left to say, because he knew I was finally done playing along. "You all deserve each other," I said, grabbing my coat. "But you don't deserve me." No one followed me out. No one called the next day. No one reached out that week, or the one after. I spent that New Year's Eve alone, sitting on the floor of my new apartment with a cheap bottle of wine and the sound of distant fireworks echoing through the city, wondering how many more lies had been dressed up as love in that house I used to call home. And just when I thought the silence had finally settled into something resembling peace, I got a text. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. The message was short, cryptic, and unsettling in its simplicity. "If you want them to regret it, call me." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And I was finally ready to make good on it. The message sat in my inbox for nearly 3 days before I responded, not because I was afraid of what it might lead to, but because I needed time to let the weight of it settle inside my chest, to turn the words over again and again like a stone in my hand, wondering whether it would skip across the surface of my life or sink straight to the bottom, dragging everything with it. "If you want them to regret it, call me." There was no name attached, no identifying clue, No tone I could dissect for intention or malice. But something about it didn't feel like a scam or a prank. It felt personal. Like a door swinging open from a hallway I hadn't dared walk down in years. I finally dialed the number on a Wednesday night, just after midnight, when the world was quiet enough to hear your own doubts whispering in the walls. The voice that answered was low, familiar, and hesitant in the way people are when they don't know if they're welcome in your memory. Claire, it said, not a question, not a greeting, just my name, spoken with that strange mix of guilt and hope that told me everything I needed to know before he even said who he was. It was Jay. Not Jay from high school, or Jay from some forgettable party. This was that Jay, the kind of person who enters your life during its messiest chapters and somehow stays intact, unjudging, and unavailable in the best and worst ways. We'd met when I was 28, right after Dean and I had one of our spectacular implosions, the kind of nights where the argument becomes so twisted, so circular, that you forget what started it, but you remember how it ended, with tears, slammed doors, and the kind of silence. That sounds like contempt. Jay had been working at a marketing agency I consulted for, and while our friendship never turned romantic, it carried a kind of intimacy I hadn't had with anyone else, a trust built on shared detachment from the lives we were supposed to be living. He disappeared one day, said he got a job in New York, or maybe Chicago. I can't even remember now, because back then I was too wrapped up in the wreckage of my marriage to pay attention. But now here he was, offering a lifeline I hadn't asked for, one that smelled like revenge and opportunity, and I wasn't sure which part of that I craved more. Jay didn't waste time with small talk. He told me he was producing content now, high-profile stuff, a mix of podcasting, independent documentaries, and what he called curated redemption narratives, basically well-polished exposés that turned real-life breakdowns into cautionary tales, empowerment stories, and click-worthy media campaigns. He said he'd been following my quiet unraveling from a distance, heard through mutual friends that I'd left Dean, dropped off social media for a while, and then re-emerged with a fire in my eyes and no attachments left to burn. People love a comeback, he said, his voice steady, persuasive. But what they really love is watching someone burn the house down on the way out, especially when the house is made of lies. At first, I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the idea of turning my pain into performance felt both ridiculous and irresistible. I'd spent years shrinking, editing myself down to something digestible for the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. And here was Jay, offering me the opposite, a platform to be loud, to be raw, to be unfiltered. It wasn't therapy. It was exposure. It was justice in the form of spectacle. It was revenge dressed in professionalism. Within a week, I found myself sitting in a studio apartment in downtown LA, surrounded by production notes, lights, and legal waivers. Jay wanted me to give a talk, something structured but emotional, clear but unflinching, about what it meant to be discarded by the people who raised you, about learning to survive without their validation, about walking away when staying meant slow suffocation. He didn't want names. He wanted truth. And I had that in spades. The idea wasn't to smear them, not directly, anyway, but to make them watch from the sidelines as I rebuilt the narrative they'd tried to silence. I spent days writing, rewriting, pacing my kitchen at 3 a.m. with a cup of coffee I didn't even want, going over every sentence like it was a bullet I might need to shoot or swallow. Jay helped shape it, but the words were mine, every scar laid bare, every betrayal held up to the light. When it was time to record, I invited them, all of them. I sent formal digital invitations to my parents, to Emily, even to Dean, each one neatly worded and free of bitterness. Just a simple note, I'll be speaking publicly about my journey. You're welcome to watch. No pressure. Of course, I knew what would happen. My mother wouldn't respond. Silence was always her preferred weapon. My father might pretend he never saw it. Dean would probably watch it drunk in the middle of the night, whispering apologies into the air that I'd never hear. And Emily? Well, Emily would watch, because narcissists never miss a chance to see how someone else is talking about them. The day of the event came faster than I expected, and as I sat in the makeup chair, letting a stranger dab at my face with powder, I felt something unexpected, not fear, not anxiety, but clarity. For once, I didn't need them to be sorry. I didn't need to prove them wrong. I just needed them to see me, not the version they'd invented to justify their cruelty, not the disappointment they passed around like a family heirloom, but the woman who had survived them. Jay told me the live stream would reach tens of thousands. His team had promoted it aggressively, tapping into every vein of digital curiosity they could find. The audience would be wide, diverse, opinionated. And that's exactly what I wanted. Because if I had to bleed, then I wanted to bleed where everyone could see. Not out of vengeance, though I won't pretend I didn't enjoy the idea of it, but because for so long, the worst parts of my story had been hidden behind polite smiles and birthday cards with hollow signatures. It was time to make the truth visible. Just 10 minutes before I stepped on stage, my phone buzzed, a new follower notification. It was Emily. No message, no emoji, just the quiet, unmistakable confirmation that she had decided to tune in. And I wondered, was it curiosity? Was it guilt? Or was she watching because, like always, she couldn't stand not being the center of attention? I didn't care. Not anymore. Because I wasn't just telling my story. I was claiming it. And they were going to watch, whether they liked it or not. There's something surreal about standing beneath stage lights that are too bright to be flattering, knowing every twitch in your face, every pause between your words, every breath you take is being streamed to thousands of strangers. And possibly a few people who once looked you in the eye and told you they loved you while quietly sharpening the knife they'd later use to gut your trust. The minutes before I stepped into the spotlight were silent in that haunting, fragile way. Right before glass shatters, the crew moved efficiently around me, adjusting microphones and sound levels, their faces blurred by the fog of my adrenaline. While Jay gave me a nod from the tech booth, calm and confident, as if the entire production wasn't hanging on the trembling edge of the story I was about to lay bare. My palms were dry, my heartbeat steady, my voice clear, not because I wasn't nervous, but because I had spent too many years being afraid of how people would interpret my pain, and now, for the first time in my adult life, I felt like fear had finally grown tired of following me. The beginning went smoother, even than I'd imagined during those late-night rehearsals alone in my apartment where I'd recited the same lines over and over until the rhythm of my own voice became muscle memory. I talked about silence, about how cruelty in families doesn't always come with bruises or raised voices, but often arrives in the form of withheld affection, in the 1,000 ways someone can tell you you're not enough without ever raising their voice. I talked about being the problem child, not because I was the problem, but because I refused to be the reflection they wanted, and for people like my mother, nothing is more unforgivable than a daughter who sees through the performance. I didn't say their names. That wasn't the point. This wasn't a courtroom. This wasn't about calling out, but calling forward the truth, the grief, the years I'd buried beneath the obligation to be good, to be grateful, to be the version of myself that wouldn't embarrass them at a dinner party or ruin a family photo. I told the story of loving someone who didn't love you enough to tell the truth, of finding a message on a phone you paid for, addressed to your sister, revealing a connection you never consented to. A betrayal that was woven so tightly into your life that you couldn't tell where your shame ended and their lies began. The chat was lighting up, full of people typing faster than the system could handle. I couldn't read the messages, but I could feel the energy shifting. There were gasps in the audience when I described the moment I walked out of my parents' house on Christmas Eve, not in anger but in revelation, as if I'd finally stopped begging to be seated at a table that had never had a place for me. I could feel them, my family, wherever they were, watching, squirming, denying, maybe even laughing to themselves. But I knew one thing for certain. They were listening. For the first time in years, I had their undivided attention. And then it happened. In the corner of the screen, just behind the teleprompter, the live stream's comments flashed across a side monitor, and amidst the flood of usernames and reactions, I saw it. Emily Reynolds has joined the chat. Her name appeared in plain white letters, so casual, so ordinary, and yet it hit me like a slap, not because I was surprised she was watching, but because I didn't know whether I wanted her to say something or stay silent forever. She started typing. 3 dots. That's all. 3 pulsing dots, blinking like a heartbeat on life support, promising something that might heal or destroy, or, most likely, neither. I felt my breath catch, but I didn't pause. I kept talking, kept pushing forward, knowing the audience couldn't see what I saw. I wasn't speaking to Emily anymore. I was speaking to everyone who had ever tried to rebuild their life from the rubble left behind by people who claimed to love them while secretly resenting their strength. I was speaking to the woman who sat in the back of the audience, dabbing her eyes with a tissue and nodding with every word I said, to the man whose jaw clenched when I described emotional manipulation masquerading as parental concern, to the teenagers watching on their phones, secretly wondering if they were wrong for feeling unloved by people who told them we did our best when they hadn't even tried. And then, just as I delivered the final line, to those who said I was too much, too broken, too loud, too different, don't reach out now. You taught me how to live without you. I just didn't realize how good I'd get at it. The monitor flickered. The blinking dots from Emily disappeared. The comment box reset. The feed cut to black. For a moment, I thought it was a technical glitch, that someone had tripped a cable or overloaded the server, but then I saw Jay's face through the glass, pale, frozen, his hand still hovering over the control board like he couldn't believe what just happened. The event host ran out with a forced smile, thanking the crowd for their attention, trying to salvage the moment, but I barely heard her. I stood on stage, mic in hand, looking out into the audience that had gone from electric to confused, while in my head the only question that mattered kept repeating itself over and over like a drumbeat. What was she going to say? Back in the dressing room, I didn't speak. I took off my mic, peeled off the blazer I'd spent too much money on, and stared at my reflection in the mirror, a woman who had just cracked her story open for the world to see, only to be cut off at the climax like a film reel sliced mid-frame. Jay came in, eyes wide, apologizing, explaining something about a server issue, about bots crashing the comment section, about a digital overload they hadn't anticipated. But I didn't care. All I wanted was the footage, the raw feed, the one that was still running locally on his laptop, saved automatically like a backup heartbeat. And there it was. He played it back, frame by frame, slow as molasses, and at the exact moment the comment was about to post, we paused. The letters hovered on the screen for just a second, just long enough for me to read what she'd typed before the blackout. It said, "You were right. But I wasn't wrong either. He wasn't just yours." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even flinch. I just sat there and let the words settle, each syllable slicing deeper than I thought possible. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't denial. It was something far worse, an admission that blurred every line I had tried to draw between victim and villain, right and wrong, betrayal and survival. I closed the laptop slowly and looked at Jay. "Do we include it?" he asked, softly, cautiously, like someone afraid to wake a sleeping dog. I smiled, not out of joy, not even out of satisfaction, but the kind of smile that comes when you've run every possible mile and there's nowhere left to go but forward. "No," I said. "We don't include it." Because the truth wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours. And I had already said what needed to be said. I never needed them to admit what they did. I just needed them to watch. And now they had. So tell me, honestly, was I wrong to expose it all, to take our family secrets and hang them out for the world to see? Or did they, after all they did, finally deserve to lose me? You decide.